Welcome, Orientalism and Techno Orientalism. Sylvia Shin Hoon Chong, Orientalism in Keywords for Asian American Studies. Orientalism, key term. It's an artifact, it's a style or trait considered characteristic of the people and cultures of Asia. The representation of Asia, especially of the Middle East, in a stereotyped way that's regarded as embodying a colonialist attitude. Edward Said, Civilizing Mission, aka imperialism. Every single empire in its official discourse has said that it's not like all the others, that its circumstances are special, that it has a mission to enlighten, to civilize, quote unquote, bring order and democracy, and that it uses force only as a last resort. And sadder still, there's always is a chorus of willing intellectuals to say calming words about the benign or altruistic empires, as if one shouldn't trust the evidence of one's eyes watching the destruction and the misery and the death brought on by the mission to civilize or civilize by Edward Said. So basically what Edward Said is saying here in his very world famous quote from his book, Orientalism, is that pretty much Orientalism is not real. It's basically a concept that's defining Asia, or in this case, more clearly the Middle East. And it's saying that Asia is the opposite of the Middle East. So it's saying that the West or the Occident is the opposite of Asia or the Orient. So for example, the West is rational. The East is irrational. The West is technologically advanced. The East is backward. And what he calls out intellectuals is that intellectuals are the ones who are justifying the quote unquote civilizing mission, which is basically another word of, it's actually professors, academics who are writing these things like, hey, it's not that bad that we took over Philippines, call them our little brown brothers. It's okay that we've taken over and bombed all these different countries that were neutral and never did anything to us because, we were trying to civilize them. These are damning words that Dr. Said has said. He's also said, the Orient and Islam have a special extra real, phenomenologically reduced status that puts them out of reach of anyone except the Western expert. So in other words, he says, no one can talk about the Asia. Only the Western person can talk about Asia because they're an expert. Of course, the Asian person doesn't know their own country. From the beginnings of their Western speculation about the Orient, the one thing the Orient could not do was to represent itself. Once again, the one thing the Orient could not do was represent itself. Evidence of the Orient was credible only after it was passed through and had been made firm by the refining fire of the Orientalist work. Indeed, my real argument is that Orientalism is and does not simply represent a considerable dimension of modern political intellectual culture, and as such has less to do with the Orient and has more to do with, quote, our world. The White Man's Burden, 1899. Was about the American colonization of the Philippines. Here, Asian American Studies does not simply replicate post-colonial studies, but produces an alternate history of American imperialism as seen in the colonial occupations of the Philippines and Japan, neo-colonial relations with Taiwan, South Korea, and Vietnam, and the continued colonization of Hawaii, Guam, Saipan, and American Samoa. In some of his work, Asian Americans are not only aligned with the colonized, but sometimes collaborate with or take on the role of imperialists, as in critiques of settler colonialism in Hawaii or Asian American conservatives. These critical and transnational investigations of American Orientalism not only reanimate the third world internationalism of the Asian American movement, but also break new ground in critical ethnic studies by showing racialization as a complex and continuing process. Techno Orientalism. Here, an experience of becoming, quote, Oriental, rather than the object imbued with Oriental culture, what is being commodified, enabling non-Asian consumers access to an idealized realm of spirituality, authenticity, or cultural otherness, and in some ways may view as a form of racial minstrelsy. Another variant form, as Techno Orientalism, has likewise transformed the process of assigning cultural and or racial meaning to commodities. This term, coined within East Asian Studies and Anthropology, Morley and Robbins, 1995. That's right, Kung Fu Panda, looking at you, Techno Orientalism. Some people might say a form of racial minstrelsy, refers to high-tech commodities. These technical Orientalism are products that seem to be neutral. Rugs, teacups, Toyota, Sony Walkman, cell phone, Nintendo. While these objects, they are nonetheless racialized as markers of Oriental technological advancement or, scarily, economic domination. Techno-Orientalism rise of American economic powers like Japan and South Korea, which aroused anxiety both in the sphere of international trade and also in domestic race relations, most tragically in the killing murder of Chinese-American engineer Vincent Chin in Detroit, Michigan in 1982, in the midst of a racial panic within the American auto industry.